Good morning. Welcome to this morning's show. Today we're discussing navigating corporate politics. And why we're discussing this for IoT? Well, when we're adopting and promoting and selling new technology, there becomes play involved within businesses of customers as well as businesses that you represent. And it's sometimes from fear of the unknown and technology replacing people and so on and so forth. So then politics start to build out. So we want to have a chat about that and how we can navigate it. Can it be a negative? Can it be a positive? And getting some great insight from Dr. David Cliff and Claire Taylor. If you've got any questions whilst we're live, please do add them in comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we can answer them live with you. And I'm going to bring in Dr. David Cliff. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. And we've got Claire. Claire's managed to join us by the skin of her teeth after doing the school drop-off.
Morning.
Hi, Claire. Morning, Claire.
Morning.
So I'm really excited to have you two guys on. David and Claire have been quite pivotal in my life and career. Claire, I met as my mentor at BT, and she created a monster that left her at BT and went off to Telstra. And David here is I first met when I had some problems, and he counselled me through them. So thank you both for the investment that you've put in me over the years. Really appreciate it. And I know the insight that you're going to share today will be absolutely brilliant. Claire, would you mind turning your speaker down a little bit, because we've got a bit of an echo there. Thank you. Okay, David, would you like to introduce yourself and just give everybody a bit of insight in who you are and what you do?
Okay, good morning. My name's David Cliff. My company's Gedanken. We offer developmental services for leaders, entrepreneurs, and indeed individuals. Whether it's your staff needs supporting, your leadership needs developing, problems need resolving at a board level, or just understanding the organizational dynamics and thinking about strategy a bit more. We always say that 45 minutes with us is a great way to find out whether we can help you move significantly forward in that. Most of our companies do very well. We typically, unless we get a remedial company in, we typically see between 25 and 150% growth in the time they're working with us. So that's the quick plug, and back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, David. And there's David's web address link there. If you'd like to find out a bit more and get in touch, please do get in touch with Gedanken. Good morning, Claire. How are you?
Beautifully. I'm good, thank you. Good morning. I'm Claire Taylor, so I've worked in corporate for 30 years, and I have a background in HR and sales and business transformation, what those political kind of relationships can do to people, business, and customers.
Right, Claire, I think we've got a bit of a connection issue, and we're struggling to hear you. Claire, I don't know if it's possible, but you might want to log out and log back in again, see if you can get a bit of a better connection.
Okay. Now.
Okay, so David, hopefully Claire will get reconnected and join us. Would you like to give everybody a bit of insight in what is corporate politics?
Well, there are umpteen definitions of politics. I guess politics is the practice of getting things done and reaping the benefits of getting those things done. It at its center is power, and it seeks to remove opposition, remove negative implications, and often produce positive effects in the career of the person involved in the politics. So if that's your boss, that can be quite stressful. If that is replicated on your board many times over, that can lead to some really complex board dynamics. And if that happens in the workplace, that can lead to some quite challenging environments where there are people who affiliate together and can create in crowds and out crowds. It can create an atmosphere for gossip and cronyism, but it can also get things done. It can also create compliance in organizations. that allow for things to happen. So it's a very, very mixed bag. Everything we do is political. How we vote, the goods we buy, everything has an underlying political bias to it. And the workplace and the boardroom is no different. So how you negotiate that depends on how savvy you are in the business of where people are driven towards seeking power and how they achieve to seek their ends.
Yeah. So it can be a positive and it can be a negative as well, can't it? And sometimes it can be quite, from personal experience over my career, it can sometimes be quite an intimidating experience when you start to see it happen, especially when it's early on in your career. Claire, thoughts?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
A little bit broken up. Let's see how we get on.
If it breaks up on my, it's because I live in the middle of nowhere, so apologies. I mean, I have very clear thoughts on what it's like to work in a corporate environment or political kind of steer. It can be very effective for the organisation, people understand where they sit within the system. But I don't think that's something that's taught to people when they join a corporate environment. If people understood what everybody's requirement was in their role, then I think that there would be less tension in the corporate and political world. And I think that would help. So having more of a systemic customer end-to-end view, that if I understood what you were doing in your process, and then I understood what David was doing, I would understand what his drivers were. And I think that would help political kind of.
Claire, I'm sorry, we're really struggling to hear you. It's a really poor connection, sadly. I'm not sure if you've got an alternative connection to be able to get in. I know StreamYard works amazing with iPads if you've got one.
Yeah, I'm on my. I'm actually on Wi-Fi, so I'm not going to tell you which brand of Wi-Fi because it should be working perfectly.
Yeah, sadly, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be able to continue with you on the show today. Sadly, with the poor connection.
That's fine. Don't worry. I'll go on silent. I'll stay on.
Okay. Hey, it's a live show. Look what happens. Things fall apart. Sorry, Claire. And thanks. I'll chat with you after the show. David, it's you and I, sadly.
Okay, last. That's one of the rare times Claire and I have had a chance to work together, so there we go.
Yeah.
Hand of fate.
We'll organise it again. We'll get there.
Yeah.
So we were talking about corporate politics, what it is, and it can be a positive and a negative. What can be the impact personally for people though that are involved in corporate politics?
Well, it depends on how well you play it. If you play it well and you're compliant and you respond to the power bases, then you can get great reward. Mm-hmm. Let's face it, we have a cabinet recruited by Boris Johnson on the politic of loyalty. Yes, that is a political dimension. So it's something about the relational space. So if the dynamic, if the key underpinning is to generate loyalty for one's leader, that actually has to be reciprocal in some ways. So miscreances, failures may be tolerated, and people may uncharacteristically fail to resign when faux pas occur in government. So it's really interesting. A single dynamic like loyalty can create something something of a body politic that can make a huge difference. So the flip side, of course, is you get cliques. You get some people who will comply with the internal politics, and some people that feel they've got their own views, and they need to preserve their own identity. So the danger is those people go into quite an armoured, entrenched position, and the pressure is either to join us and comply, or be seen as somehow cast at arm's length, vilified, marginalised in some way. So all of these things take time and energy away from the core processes of whatever group or organisation you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things. I think what I recognised and with the help from yourself in a role that you helped me with was that fear, and sometimes a combination of I was newly into a very senior role, that a bit of that imposter syndrome kicks in. You start to get pulled into some political plays from people that you haven't had the opportunity to build a relationship with. And then you're starting to be pulled in different directions because people want you, especially when you're further up that food chain, to be part of their cabinet, so to speak, their supporters in doing it. And that can have a real detriment to your mindset, and also self-challenge yourself on your decision making as well. What are good tools to help you get clarity?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting, and this isn't a plug, but a lot of people come to see me so they can have an offline discussion and reorientate themselves to where they stand in relation to the organization. And not surprisingly, a lot of those people find that they move on because that there is a price of compliance. So you've raised a really interesting one, imposter syndrome. I mean, I write a lot about imposter syndrome because usually imposter syndrome involves high achievers. If you think of the notion of power having how people interact, the three bases of power, affiliation, and achievement is one theory. Well, achievers often don't require affiliators. Affiliators work on who they know and the networks they have, and people who seek power actually seek control and direction. So an achiever is likely to be one who suffers from imposter syndrome because they'll have had a fairly meteoric career on the back of achievement. They come into a group of affiliators and are not part of the group. And that therein is the tension. And often, and Paul, you and I have talked about the phenomena of workplace mobbing, where a group can blame and scapegoat an individual. Frequently in organizations that are affiliative, i.e. it's about the relationships in the group that are often more important than the goals, the external goals. An achiever can actually be marginalized, vilified, blamed, and basically hounded out. And this is where workplace mobbing comes. It's almost an unconscious process by a group, but it will be a conscious process by some certain members of the group, and that group can actually be manipulated to create a toxic environment for an achiever.
Yeah, I think the mobbing subject is something we should discuss on another show because it's quite deep.
It is.
And it's working in American companies was where I first experienced it, and I've started to see it, and I'm hearing it more over here in the UK with people in very high-profile corporate roles to sort of mid-level type stuff that unless you know about it, and then you go, oh, hold on, because when we chatted, when I was experiencing it, it was a lot of this orchestration of people at a lower level were making comments to my management about my style and profile that was just complete twist of reality. Luckily, when I got educated by yourself about mobbing, when I told you the story and you were like, well, this is mobbing, that I was then able to highlight that, inform and educate that some management don't have that. They don't actually realize that is a thing.
Well, they don't understand that a group of friends to one person is a mob to somebody who's not part of the group. I mean, a gang used on a street corner are just mates having fun. But if you're an old person, insecure, and you've been victimized in the past, they are a youth culture threat to you, and a clear and present threat physically. So this is the problem about perceptions. Not everyone affiliates. Some people just want to come in and do their work and go. I mean, we've heard about, if you talk about office politics, think of the tyranny of the office Christmas party, just putting it at a very simple level. And the people that don't want to go, and the group assumptions that are made about those people. We're not celebrating them as individuals, as introverts, as people who perhaps don't like to socialize that way, or as people who have particular boundaries in their workplace relationships. They're just not part of the group. They're not on board. They won't sacrifice a bit of themselves for us. So immediately negative judgments are formed about that. And that's not helpful, because if we're talking about culture of greater workplace engagement, if we're talking about good mental health, if we're talking about appreciating and celebrating people's individuality in the modern workplace, some of these group processes actually work against that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think there's some phenomenal startup cultures, but actually when you start to break it down and analyze it a bit, it does kind of become a bit of a mob culture. Hey, we're all hip and cool, and and all the rest of it. We all go out drinking together. But some people don't like that. Some people, especially in startups that are technology driven, a lot of the developers and stuff are quite often introverts. They like their little world that's in front of a screen. They don't socialize very well. That, as you say, they don't come to the Christmas party, and then questions start to be asked and stuff like that. It's like some people just don't like that type of thing. They feel uncomfortable with it.
At least, absolutely, and at least 40% of the population are what you would describe as introvert, arguably more. Now, to bring them into a situation like that is excruciating for them. It means to be part of the group means their workplace experience is diminished. They're in a situation of compliance relationships rather than wanting to be there. So the key thing here is we've got to start to respect individuals here, and whilst it's quite legitimate to understand what are the macro politics of the organization, i.e. what are its values, what drives it, what are its goals and ambitions, what are the systems and processes it uses to get there. When it reduces to a personal level, we've got to remember there are some toxic effects. So mobbing is one of them, but that before it gets to mobbing, that very simple sense of discomfort through having to comply with something that's not essentially part of the contract.
Yeah. Claire, I've just posted there Claire's chat. She's contributing through private message. Thank you, Claire. And she's just saying that corporates can have the systematic issues that schools have. The grouping of people like you see in the playground can align to the workplace too. It's really quite interesting to observe how people operate in a large ecosystem. I totally agree, Claire. It's sort of that thing that continues through from childhood, isn't it?
Well, I get that, and I think there's two issues there. A lot of our social skills are forged in childhood anyway, and they aren't necessarily sophisticated, and there are some organizations reinforce that. But the other thing is, if we look at evolutionary psychology, primarily we're tribal, and we feel most comfortable and feel we've got survival advantage with groups that are like us. So there's a natural tendency to affiliate, to coalesce together, and then the outsider is not seen as advantageous in that respect. Now, the problem for the outsider, especially the one you were talking about, say, with a bit of touch, who's a high achiever, who's come in, touch of imposter syndrome, is that they tolerate and accommodate the internal politics rather than challenge them.
Yeah.
So what you get is internal groupthink going on with the nucleus of people who associate together, and the dissenters never speak, or the dissenters code their it's interesting looking at some of the top tips on office politics and whatever is mollify the word no or never is one of the pieces of advice, because that is almost too confrontational in that sort of situation. But sometimes you need no or never. Sometimes you need a devil's advocate function in a board or in a work group. And if that quality is suppressed, what you get are people patting each other on the back until their corporate endeavors have to face the howling winds of the real markets. And it's at that point they realize that perhaps the groupthink's been delusional thinking. And the company suffers. So, dissent, particularly at a board level, but even at a workplace, healthy debate, dissent, the acknowledgement of individual views is really important. And having an organizational culture that allows for that and revisits that regularly is quite important.
Yeah. So thank you, Louise. She's saying everybody's different and everybody should respect their choices, which is quite correct. But that can be quite often challenging because, people see management styles are very different. Some have a very much micromanagement, hierarchical style of management that works for them. That actually can create quite a lot of politics because they then have their very close advisors. So people are trying to influence to get their voice heard. You have some businesses, like a lot of startups, they have big open forums with everybody within the company for the management to take feedback, to allow their employees to feel like their voice is heard, to try and sort of put out those negative fires of politics. Because I think we would both agree that politics can have positives and negatives. It's about how you orchestrate and manage them. Would you agree?
And I think I'm thinking about you need to understand your organizational culture. It's no good walking into an organization where the politics is such that you perceive them to be quite toxic and you think somehow you'll affect change within. You need to know the challenge. Equally, within the organization, I'm thinking about Philip Beaumart's work on the tacit assumptions that go on in organizations. Very often the politics of an organization, the thinking styles, are never discussed. There is never an explicit discussion about what is our organizational culture, what are our values, how do our staff see us, and actually how truly listening are our consultation processes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is one of those things where businesses kind of just get lost in doing the do, rather than thinking about the bricks they build upon its culture and communication within a business to be able to work as one rather than having little silos. And some management that I've worked with in the past have said to me they don't mind that. They don't mind if there's little battles going on. It keeps things fresh. But what's the negative detriment to the team members on that? Claire's feedback on here is, I do believe the tensions can reduce when a person understands where they fit in the end-to-end journey. If I use an example of tensions in process, a customer places an order, and if it hits 150 for systems, that's failure points, aka tension points. When a person can only see their part of the process, they can only see what they can see. I think that's quite an interesting perspective.
I think that's right, and I think what we're talking about politics as a sort of global thing across an organization. There are actually subgroups in organizations, often with their own individual politics. I mean, the classic cliche is the tension that exists between sales and marketing and production, for example, in an organizational process. And they can have two quite different politics, and that creates internal tensions in those sections, but it often creates tensions between those sections. When they're operating often from quite conflicting, sometimes, worldviews. So it's quite a complex process of sort of stripping this out. And I think organizations, particularly boards, are not necessarily as process aware, as interpersonally process aware of just how important these factors are. And the danger is, of course, it's a top-down thing. Brought for our values. We are a company that believes in openness and transparency in this and that and the other, and suddenly it's pushed down on rote, even by quite facilitative leaders, rather than there's some time to debate it.
Yeah. So in changing culture within businesses, who's aware within a business? We're talking corporate today. Who within that business is the key to really instigate that change as the culture? Is it from a CEO level down, but they may not be aware of it? That CEOs have certain personality traits and mindsets. Who is the person that can really ignite that change?
I think it has to come from the higher echelons, because what we're talking about is something about a total organizational culture, and this, for me, inevitably start at the top, because even if there's a counterculture from the bottom, that counterculture is often expressed in the form of workplace relationships rather than a formal counterculture. So you get industrial relations tensions that can come out of it coming from further down the line. Often, you're right, CEOs, especially who got the sort of heroic leader style CEOs who believe in leading from the front and everybody should follow, and why can't they follow along, then it comes down the line that way. And I think the board is very, very important in having the right composition in order to develop that culture. Claire's quite right, though. Nobody should collude with a culture that's toxic. And I think it really is everyone in the organization needs to feedback and needs to whether it's lobbying, whether it's staff participation or whatever, get their concerns aired and felt in whatever way they feel safe to do. But again, it depends on the consultation systems and the communication systems within the organization as to how safe people ultimately feel to do that.
Yeah. So just as we wrap up here, we're running 5 minutes over, but I've allowed that due to the technical issues earlier. What are the three key things that you would raise to anybody that is starting to realize or feel like they're being pulled into politics within the business? What are two or three tools that you would recommend to help with their mental state to navigate through that?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that if we're feeling stress, it could be because we're in a position where we can neither express ourselves nor communicate our concerns, and we need to be quite clear about what those things are. Is the organizational culture we're in something we feel up to challenge, or something we need to actually think of? Is this the right location for us ultimately? And that's a choice for the individual. Organizations have got to make themselves good workplaces. And I always say, before you do any mental health stuff in your organization, mental health policies and all of what I call are the trimmings, which become trimmings when good management practices are absent. Really, the secret of mental health in the workplace is for employers to be good employers. It starts at that fundamental. So I think you've got to look at where you stand in relation to the organization. I think some external support is often good, so you can benchmark that against somebody who's maybe not vested in the company, but can actually help you examine your thoughts and feelings. I think there's also an issue about being courageous enough to start to talk to colleagues, to start to raise these issues, and to be part of the change you want to see. And find out from that perspective, start to elicit feedback from others.
Yeah. Interesting. I was going to ask a question there, and I know it would have opened up a can of worms, and we would be here for another 20 minutes. I'm going to hold that for another show. Some feedback from Claire here. Let me just pop this into the chat here. Claire had a great mentor that taught her to treat everyone with a sense of how would you want to be treated. This stuck with me and affects my leadership style. I've seen that from Claire, and I wholeheartedly agree. That's definitely how she works, and I commend her on that.
Yeah. It's what you call pro-social modeling. Is that you've got to be the change you want?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about also for me personally. One of the things that you taught me, and I've been taught throughout my career from some phenomenal leaders. I'm not going to call bosses like I used to, leaders. Is I'm not always right. I have a point of view. It doesn't mean that it's always right, but if I share it and take feedback and have it as a discussion, rather than trying to underhandedly orchestrate to influence what I think's right, without having that discussion, is a positive view for me. It's helped me navigate. I can be a challenging person to work with because I'm a bit of a brute force sometimes, as I've been described, because I'm quite passionate about what I do. But I have an open mind and I have open ears, and I'll listen to feedback if people are good enough to share it with me.
I also think it's for leaders and boards to recognize that dissenting voices are not Luddite. They're actually the shard sometimes that shatters the consensus and brings real change in an organization. Takes you to a perspective that you haven't already had. And that can give your organization a real advantage. If we're personally brave enough to listen to dissenting voices, to listen to alternative views, and find processes to capture the good in that, rather than simply marginalize the person who believes in it.
Yeah. David, thank you very much. Claire, thank you very much for your contribution through messaging. It's a shame we couldn't get you on live today.
Yeah, that's a real shame, yeah.
And thanks to Stuart, who's always supporting, and he was unable to join us today as well. David, it's always an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. It's been too long. Let's not leave it as long this time.
Absolutely, yes. We must catch up. Definitely.
Thanks very much, guys, for contributing. I hope you enjoyed the show this morning. And we'll be back next week, and I'll be announcing on Friday what that show will be. Also, if you check out AD-Link Technology on YouTube, we have the hack announcement. We've got the winner with the Intel team. That's taking place at 5 p.m. UK time. So if you follow AD-Link Technology on YouTube, you'll see the links there. Or follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. You'll see the information on the end credits. David, thanks very much. Claire, thanks very much. Absolute pleasure.
Good to see you all.
And good.